It's Tuesday, May 9th. The hurricane of draft season is beyond us. Many of us are seeing our spouses, our children, perhaps friends, if you have them, for the first time in months. So it's a time when really only the true fantasy freaks are checked in and listening to this podcast. And hey, I appreciate you freaks out there. And we have a great topic for freaks only today. So we brought in a real freak show in the late round quarterback himself, the late round podcast, the late round draft guide, JJ Zachariason. Buddy, what's going on, man?
What a kind intro for me there, saying that I'm the freak show of the fantasy space. I appreciate it, buddy.
Well, again, all love and support to the freaks, man, because without the freaks like you and the people that tune in to, I mean, listen, I'm a freak show too, bro. I'm charting Romeo Dobbs routes, last night. So who's the real freak here? I think that's not up for debate, but shout out to those people because they're the ones that keep the lights on in the off season.
Yeah, I mean, look, whenever I'm doing profiles for my prospect guide on Dontavian Wicks and these guys who get drafted in the 7th round, it's just like, what am I doing right now with this life I have?
One trip around the sun for all of us, pal, and this is how we choose to spend it.
Exactly.
But hey, listen, it's better than having a real job, so there is that. I'm sure that the people out there listening are like, I'm chopping down trees in the woods or
we're grateful.
Factory work. Yeah, we're very, very grateful. So anyways, today, later in the episode, we are going to do a 2-round 24-pick dynasty rookie mock draft as a way to talk about the long-term value of these guys, the players that just got drafted, how they might fit long-term, and really, like, rookie drafts are going on right now, so this should be helpful. But before we do that, we do have at least one piece of news item that I want to talk to you about, JJ, because I was a little disconnected this weekend, took a little final California camping trip here, and came up at least once for air to notice that there was a lot of Kadarius Toney talk on the old Twitter space, and I'm curious to get your reaction to this. So basically, Chiefs GM Brett Veach praised Kadarius Toney. The internet runs absolutely wild with it. Speculation that this means the franchise believes that Toney's the KC wide receiver 1. He's going to be the number 1 receiver for this team this year. Here's the actual quote from Brett Veach. He's predominantly been a guy that is a slot receiver, returner, runner, a gadget guy, if you will. But I don't know if there's a limit on his game because he has a vertical game. I don't know if Florida was one of the offenses that pushed the ball down the field his time early on in New York. I don't know if they were a team that really pushed the ball vertically down the field. So that was sort of the actual quote from Brett Veach there. He said a few other things about Toney. They're obviously excited about him for this year. The ESPN article said, they think he's going to be the next number 1 receiver. Pro Football Talk took a lot of leaps with the quote there. So I'm curious, JJ, where do you stand in the great Kadarius Toney wars in fantasy football? And what do you think about this wide receiver core for this year?
I mean, I think that if we're designating like wide receiver 1 the way that people are, I think that's the wrong approach, especially the Kansas City offense, where we're just likely not going to see something like that, like a Tyreek Hill emerge. I don't think that's in Kadarius Toney's range of outcomes, if that's what people are sort of thinking, with this like vertical threat. He does have marks, since his rookie season where he's been unbelievably efficient when he's gotten the ball. I mean, his yards per route run during his rookie season was the one that we really don't see very often. His targets per route run was pretty high too. And so, that gets signal and that does matter to some degree, but he's still a very raw receiver. I mean, he gets a lot of manufactured touches and that's not always what you want, out of a guy who's going to see consistent volume in his offense. The thing is though, whenever I see stuff like this, I see how the market reacts in fantasy football and I see what the market is thinking about these players in fantasy football. And to me, there's not a significant opportunity cost for really any of these guys in Kansas City, considering the offense you're attaching them to, the quarterback you're attaching them to, etc. And so I'm not really that concerned from like a fantasy perspective if you want to buy into Kadarius Toney, because I don't think that his ADP is going to rise to some like insane level to where that opportunity cost is just way too high. So I think from that perspective, it's fine to buy into Kadarius Toney. I think from the perspective of, is he a wide receiver 1 in fantasy or in real football? And is he like you look at true wide receiver 1s across the league. You look at Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs. That's not what Kadarius Toney is. I mean, at least to this point. Now, there's a lot of reason to believe that he can improve and get better. I mean, he was basically a utility guy at Florida. Like, they didn't use him until that final season as a true wide receiver. So there's a learning curve there, but that's also not necessarily always like a good thing. I think that we end up using that as an excuse and a crutch far too often and far too long. And then eventually it's like, oh, well, this guy just never really had it. And that's why he wasn't a wide receiver in the first place. So you can go both ways. I don't think that Kadarius Toney is going to be this like 130 target type wide receiver. I would be very shocked if that happens. But can he live up to ADP expectation? I think that's still very possible.
Yeah, I think I agree with you where what even is the value of the wide receiver one, quote unquote, for Kansas City? Like none of these guys profile as somebody, even if you're a big believer in like Sky Moore or Rashee Rice at some point, or, you know, MVS, like none of these guys are going to, like, what are they going to top out at 110 type of targets? Probably with Travis Kelce still there. That's the thing is like the leader, the central gravitational force of this passing game is going to remain Travis Kelce. I have just always like kind of pushed back on the notion that Kadarius Toney's, like you mentioned, yards per route run or targets per route run should be weighted the same as some of these other guys because he runs those gadget type routes, those design touches, the Mickey Mouse type routes, as Hayden Winks has called them. And I like to co-opt that phrase as well.
I like that.
He's not really doing big boy down the field wide receiver stuff. And, you know, at times he flashes that ability. Like I can think of two kind of go routes targets that he got for Kansas City. One, he pulled it in against Jacksonville down the sideline. The other one, I can't remember the game now, but it was like a night game when Juju was hurt, I think. And, you know, he let the ball slip out of his hands in the end zone and he was hurt like 2 plays later. And it's like, that's the Kadarius Toney experience. I'm with you that these guys who are banged up all the time are never going to rise that high in ADP because people get burnt. They like are just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I just think this wide receiver core, like we just did this last year, where the highest we got somebody to go was Juju, who was about like 1,000-yard player had he stayed healthy the full season, not like a true week-to-week difference maker. And he was by far more of a proven commodity than anybody in this receiver room. So I just personally don't want to repeat the same mistakes from last year and like get too excited about anyone here.
Well, the other thing, too, is that, you know, we entered last year with question marks, even though, you know, we knew Patrick Mahomes was Patrick Mahomes. We knew Travis Kelce was Travis Kelce. We still had plenty of question marks as to how this Chiefs offense would operate, how they would deploy these wide receivers, what kind of target shares these guys would have. And then what happened? They won the freaking Super Bowl. So why are they going to shift things up and change things up and be like, no, Kadarius Toney, we're going to force feed him 150 plus targets after we just showed the world that we can get Sky Moores and Rashee Rices in the draft and utilize them. You know, even though, I mean, they didn't utilize, Sky Moore very heavily last year, but, you know, we can get guys like MVS from Green Bay and have sort of this like hodgepodge of wide receivers that are good, not great, and still be the most productive passing offense in football. So, you know, I think Toney is great with the ball in his hands. You can't really deny that. Getting the ball in his hands is going to be difficult to do that very, very consistently over and over and over again. That's sort of my general take.
Yeah, these gadget guys, it's tough to integrate them. And I agree with Brett Veach. Like, he's been a gadget guy throughout the course of his career. And I don't think when you isolate him as a route runner, he shows you the traits and abilities to project him into much more than that. So I think him in that gadget type of role, it's tough to integrate those guys into the regular flow of the offense, but it can work. And I feel like Toney is a natural replacement for what they lost in McCole Hardman. Yeah. Sky Moore is a natural replacement for what they lost in Juju. And like, I know we were both like big fans of Sky Moore coming into the process. And I think when you look at him as a rookie, he was fine when he was on the field. He just wasn't on the field very much, which kind of makes sense considering they had a veteran, a steady guy in his most optimal role. So I think they have a 1 through 3 of MVS as the X receiver, Sky Moore as kind of a flanker slot, Kadarius Toney as like a gadget outside flanker slot receiver hybrid as well. So I think that's what the receiver room is going to look like. And these guys will all probably like pick their spots during the season in terms of when they get going. So I'm glad we're kind of on the same page with this one. How do you feel about Sky Moore heading into year 2? Because I know part of your prospect guide and your draft guide is the year 2 model. And I know that he's not going to be looking too good in something like that, considering he never played as a rookie, basically.
Yeah, I mean, look, it gets weighted. Their rookie season numbers get weighed pretty heavily, obviously, because we get better data from rookie seasons than we had versus them in college. And I like Sky Moore coming out. You know, I didn't see him necessarily, like my model at least didn't see him in the same tiers like Jahan Dotson, but he was the next guy after those first round wide receivers for that model. You know, he had a lot of good analytical marks. I was really, you know, excited about him. But when wide receivers, at least from a fantasy perspective, when wide receivers don't do much during their rookie season, it's very, very rare, like incredibly rare for them to do something big later on in their career. I have this thing called journey comparables where it looks at how guys looked in their prospect score entering the league and then how they looked in their year 2 score. So the year 2 model just tries to project how well they're going to do in year 2 and year 3. And these journey comparables for Sky Moore are Terrace Marshall, Andy Isabella, and DJ Chark. So you do have the DJ Chark, like the big bump from DJ Chark from year 1 to year 2. But I don't think people realize how rare that kind of bump and that jump statistically really is, because it doesn't happen very often. So, I'm probably going to be a little bit lower on Sky Moore, even though I do think the talent is at least was there to some degree.
Yeah, and I don't think he ever profiled, obviously, behind the first round receivers for you in reception perception, considering how he was playing at a super low level of competition. He never profiled as a guy that was going to be like a true number one receiver either. But can he still be like a useful starting receiver? I think that's pretty possible. So, yeah, from a fantasy perspective, I don't know what you want to do with that. But he's a guy that's going to go so late, I think, at least at this point in the offseason. We'll see if he gets like steamed up. But in the very same, it is funny because in the very same article that we're talking about with Kadarius Toney, it also mentions like they have a ton of faith in Sky Moore and like a ton of like they're expecting a lot from him, stuff like that. But obviously Toney gets the headlines here, so there we are with that. But there we go. So all right, let's get into our Dynasty rookie mock draft here. A couple little highlights, housekeeping before we get into it. We're not going to do Superflex, sort of a joint decision, but I was leaning that way anyways because listen, we talked about the freaks up top. If you're listening to this, you're a freak. We get it. If you're playing Superflex, you're a real freak. And I say this, JJ, as someone that plays a ton of Superflex. We're in a Superflex Dynasty League together. So we're going to try to appeal a little bit more to the masses here. And frankly, we've talked about the quarterbacks so damn much on this show at this point. Yeah. I'd like to talk about some of the other ones. Also, I did make an executive decision, JJ. I'm going to take the first pick in this draft, but it's not because I'm a jerk. I have a good reason. And it's to compliment you, pal, because, listen, everybody knows first pick's going to be Bijan Robinson. That's a pretty quick discussion. Because you are so smart and so sharp, I'm really much more curious what you're going to do with the second pick than the first pick. So I hope you can forgive me here for just taking the first pick in this thing on my own show, which is super rude on paper.
No, I get it. You want the guests to have to make the tough decisions here. But to me, and we'll get to it in a second, but to me, the 102 is an easy decision this year.
And that in and of itself is far more interesting than hearing JJ say, yeah, you should take Bijan Robinson because he's really good. So we're gonna kick this thing off here at the first overall pick in our Dynasty rookie mock draft. I am gonna take Falcons running back Bijan Robinson, and I think it's pretty easy. Look, he's a great player. Great prospect. He's been the 101 forever, JJ. I like the Falcons landing spot. I am like the world's biggest Arthur Smith defender from a play calling, play designing perspective. I don't know if I want to get a beer with the guy, but I do think his offense is going to be really good this year. So I love the landing spot, and obviously the player is great.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's easy to criticize Arthur Smith because we all drafted Drake London and, everyone loves Kyle Pitts, but he was that offense was incredibly efficient given the personnel they had, and what they did on the ground was amazing. I mean, they had 3 top 15 running backs in success rate last year in Tyler Algier, Caleb Huntley, and Cordero Patterson. Tyler Algier was top 6 in yards after contact per attempt, which you could sit here and argue and say, well, maybe they didn't need Bijan Robinson because they already had this great running game. And that's a separate discussion. We're talking fantasy football here. That's all that matters, right? And so, you can definitely make that argument. But Robinson, to me, he's going to probably be a lock if he's healthy to see 300 plus carries in that offense. And then given the fact, they're not going to be a pass heavy offense. They were the fourth, they had the 4th lowest pass rate since 2011 last season, but there's not a lot of offensive weapons through the air in that offense. I mean, it's literally just Kyle Pitts and Drake London. So Bijan Robinson could see a 15% target share in that offense too. And so the combination of those two things, I think you can make the argument that in redraft, he's the RB2 this year behind Christian McCaffrey. I mean, it's that decent of a spot. So the 101 in rookie drafts is pretty easy.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted the target share part because that was what Arthur Smith, even in the post-draft pressers, like, oh yeah, the running stuff's obvious. Like, there's really no need to talk about that. It's what he can do without being a rusher. I'm kind of paraphrasing there, but I think that is really exciting. And yeah, if you just look at the history of the Falcons offense, when it's not Marcus Mariota playing quarterback for them, they actually do dial up the pass attempts. They're a better passing offense. And yeah, like we're talking about Matt Collins might be the number 2 receiver. Scotty Miller might be like the number 3 receiver. So there's a lot of room for Bijan Robinson to do stuff through the air. But all right, JJ, let's move to the second pick here. You've got this one. It's an easy decision for you. Who are you taking?
I'm going Jahmyr Gibbs. And look, pre-draft, I had Jaxon Smith-Njigba here. But I think a few things happened pre-draft. JSN obviously didn't go in like that top 12-ish range that some thought that he could go, which is important. I mean, historically, there's a big difference between top 10, top 12 wide receiver picks and guys who go in the 20s. And I know that he was like in the fringe there, but being the 20th overall pick, but JSN dropped a little bit, didn't go to like this ideal landing spot for year one. And so there's reasons that he slid, from pre to post draft. Jahmyr Gibbs went the opposite direction where, I did a lot of analysis this offseason on running back weight, mostly because we had two guys in this class in Jahmyr Gibbs and Devon Achane who were smaller in size. Jahmyr Gibbs weighing in at 199, Devon Achane like 188. A lot of people think that like threshold analysis is what's going on here with Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, oh, he would have been fine if he hit 200 pounds, but he was 199 pounds and therefore he's not fine. That's not really how I approach this stuff. I look at it in buckets. And if you look at since 2011 at running back weight and you adjust that for draft capital, guys who are under the 210 pound mark generally do not hit at nearly as good of a rate as the guys who are over that 210 mark. So it's not 200, it's 210, which is significantly higher than where Jahmyr Gibbs is at. And so pre-draft, where we're looking at, obviously Gibbs had the goods as a receiver, probably the best receiving back that we've seen. I mean, quite some time out of any. I mean, probably the last like decade or so draft classes. I guess CMC aside, and maybe Saquon aside, but one of the best receiving backs we've seen in a really long time. So that was there. It was just how much volume was he going to see in his offense? Because the size argument is not about can this guy do this thing. It's about how is the coach going to deploy this player, and that's that's a very important distinction. I'm not sitting here saying Jahmyr Gibbs can't handle 220 carries and 80 targets through the air. I'm saying I don't know how these coaches are going to do that because historically coaches have not given smaller running backs a lot of work. And so with Gibbs, though, he goes from being maybe an early second round pick, maybe late first round pick, where his comps looked more like Giovanni Bernard, Isaiah Peed. He was better than those guys, but size wise and sort of production wise, he comped closely to them. And he was like a smaller Alvin Kamara. Maybe I saw that comp was thrown out there a lot, but he's 15 pounds lighter than Alvin Kamara. But then he goes 12th overall. And that shift is very, very important because when you're looking at this analytically, you're now going from, oh, he's sort of kind of like a better Giovanni Bernard to, oh, he's actually closer to Christian McCaffrey now in terms of how we're viewing this guy and what we've seen historically from these players. And so, him going 12th overall, going to the Lions, them already having a version of Jahmyr Gibbs on that team and them saying, no, Jahmyr Gibbs is that much better than DeAndre Swift that we need to get him 12th overall. And by the way, see you later, DeAndre Swift. I think that matters too. And it's a good landing spot overall where the offense should be able to move. The running backs there last season ranked first in fantasy football in points scored as a team. I think that everything sort of lines up for Gibbs to not only produce and be like a very, very solid PPR RB2, maybe have these spiked RB1 seasons potentially. But he's also going to appreciate and value really well in the dynasty market. That's one thing that we can't overlook here is that players who go this high in drafts, not only do they hit very well at running back, but if you look at year over year ADP data, even if they get hurt, even if they bust their first year, they still maintain that value. So that's another reason why going after Gibbs makes a lot of sense.
That's a great point. And I think what you said about the weight, not necessarily can the players do it, but how do the coaches view that within like historical thresholds and stuff like that. It makes so much sense. And you see this at the receiver position all the time. Like Treylon Burks is a great example. He's this big hulking receiver. I think he would be better used as like a Juju style big slot receiver, but the Titans are like, nah, he's a big receiver. Like we're going to throw him out at the X receiver position. And it was a little bit of a mixed result as a rookie because of that. So it is a lot more so what the coaches think than, our opinion of the player's game with that weight context in mind. Cause I definitely push back on weight stuff all the time is like, these guys weight fluctuates all the time. JJ, you know this, like in personal life, your own weight fluctuates all the time based on what you're doing and stuff like that. So these guys might come to training camp at like 230 and leave training camp at 225, but is Jahmyr Gibbs going to be like 215 pounds in a few years? Probably not. So I like thinking about it from the bucket perspective there. That makes a ton of sense. And overall, man, again, I wanted you to make this pick because you're smarter, you're better than me, and I would have made the same pick here. And I'm the receiver guy, right? So I do think when people have asked me, who do I take it to, Jahmyr Gibbs or JSN? My answer is usually like what's your personal preference? Like, do what you want here. I don't think there's like a wrong pick, but ultimately, I think Jahmyr Gibbs, from a dynasty value perspective, is going to age really well, and I think that's a good call there. At the third overall pick, though, this I also think is easy. I think this is JSN here. First receiver drafted. I know he's going to check a lot of boxes based on his production and everything. I know he looks pretty good in your model because I read your draft guide and it's good. Everybody else should read the late round draft guide. He's just a good player, man. And yeah, it's an interesting landing spot short term because like they might have the best receiver trio in the league by the end of the year with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and JSN. Lockett's my dude, but he is going to be 31 here pretty soon. Like, how long is he going to realistically be with the team? I also think it's kind of funny, JJ, that immediately, JSN gets drafted there and some of the reactions like, this is not good for Tyler Lockett. It's like, hey, maybe it's not good for DK Metcalf, who like Tyler Lockett right now might be a better player than DK Metcalf. And I don't even think like you could categorize that as even close to a sizzling hot take. But regardless, good landing spot. Love the offense this year. Love the player. I think this is an easy call for JSN at pick 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I wrote in my write-up of JSN was I think that people are sort of overlooking the fact that he could easily, entering 2024, be the target share leader in that offense in 2024. He's going to see easier looks in that offense. He's going to be more of the security blanket. We've done shows. We did my show together, and we talked about him being sort of this Keenan Allen type player. And in that environment, you could see him being that security blanket while DK Metcalf gets more of those down the field targets and red zone looks, etc., that are more highly valued in fantasy, sure. But I could easily see JSN as early as next year, getting that really, really high, 25+% target share in the offense. And then, Tyler Lockett, they have somewhat of an out from a contract standpoint next year. I don't think that they'll necessarily take it because he's been a lifer. The tough part with JSN, at least for 2023, is Tyler Lockett's good, like you said. Yeah. And I feel like it's like I said this on my show earlier that dropped today, but it was like Tyler Lockett's not Nico Collins. It's not just like some like pretty ordinary replacement level receiver. And so I think what we're going to see is that JSN's going to have to work for it to find the field because I'm assuming they're going to run a lot more 11 personnel. Shane Waldron coming from that Sean McVay coaching tree. We know Sean McVay loves running that 11 personnel. So I think we're going to see that more and maybe less targets to the tight end. But I do think that it's going to be a little bit of a struggle the first half of this season for JSN to produce from a fantasy perspective. Not that he won't be good, but I think that the other weapons there and the other players there are enough to sort of keep him off of being that really highly targeted wide receiver.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like Geno threw for 4,200, almost 4,300 yards last year. Is he going to push to like 5,000 to support all these guys? I think that's probably a bit wish casting, even though, man, I do really love this offense and how it's set up right now. So pretty exciting landing spot. And I could easily see him being the target leader in 24 and 25 and beyond. Love your point about the high percentage, low percentage targets. So, all right. Fourth pick here, JJ. I do think this is where it gets a little interesting. I'm not going to say this is like a teardrop or something like that, but I did view JSN as a tier of his own at the receiver position this year. These two running backs are pretty obvious. So where are you going with the fourth pick here?
Yeah, me too. I had Bijan in his own tier. I had Jahmyr Gibbs in his own tier, and then I had JSN in his own tier. And then after that, there's a little bit of a cluster. Here's where I have Jordan Addison, and I say that because I think that there are times where if you do have a cluster from a tiering perspective, you can look at landing spot and use that as a good tiebreaker. And of these three, I like his landing spot for his skill set most. We know he's not going to be the alpha in this offense, and we don't want Jordan Addison to be the alpha in his offense. He's a really, really good number 2 guy. And obviously he's playing with arguably the best wide receiver in the game, and Justin Jefferson. He's going to be able to play the slot, which he performed a lot better in the slot in college at Pitt, where he ran in the slot about 3 times the rate as he did in his final season when he played at USC. And he was unbelievably productive at Pitt. As we know, he won the Biletnikoff. Hail to Pitt, by the way. And so I think Addison in that offense, they were the 4th highest pass rate offense in football last year in neutral game scripts. That was O'Connell's first season as head coach. They're probably going to be fairly pass heavy regardless of their personnel and such. And now he's going to walk in and probably be the number 3, maybe even number 2. I mean, I don't think it would be shocking if Jordan Addison out targets TJ Hawkinson this year in that offense. Yeah, he's definitely going to be the number 2 wide receiver. And he's going to get experience playing the perimeter, playing the slot when they have 3 wideouts out there. And that's good. We want Jordan Addison to be able to take advantage of those matchups. So I think Addison's the play here. Great production profile in college. Obviously a little undersized, but like I said, that's why it's great that he's not an alpha.
Yeah, it's a perfect landing spot for a player like Jordan Addison, who can line up as the flanker, line up in the slot with Justin Jefferson there. It's a great spot for him. I think it's perfect. Long term, short term. He probably projects as the best rookie receiver in year one of all these guys from a landing spot opportunity talent perspective. Really like him. Now, for the fifth pick here, I do think this is interesting still. We're in a pretty decent bucket. By the way, it's going to get weird pretty soon here after these next few picks. It gets kind of weird in the late first round. But for me, I feel really comfortable with Zay Flowers here at the fifth pick. I liked him better than Jordan Addison as a prospect. I know the landing spot has people freaked out, and pretty similar to what I said with Geno Smith. I don't suddenly expect Lamar Jackson to throw for like 5,500 yards or something like that. But you've got to take out the Greg Roman Ravens and like kind of put that out of your mind. They will always lean slightly run heavy, I think, or at least like, they're never going to be top 10 in pass attempts, I think, with Lamar Jackson as the quarterback, because he's going to take off and run on his own. But from a philosophical standpoint, this Ravens offense is shifting. Everything they've done from the moment the offseason started has indicated that they're going to be having a little bit of a philosophy shift here. So Zay Flowers, I think, great pick here at 5. Shout out to me. I think Zay Flowers, really good prospect. He's tied long-term to an efficient quarterback, even if we don't think Lamar is going to go crazy from a passing volume perspective. That's a good thing. And honestly, again, it's a little crowded for 2023 because Odell Beckham's there. Rashad Bateman's coming back. Mark Andrews is still in place. Is probably the guy that projects to lead the team in targets. But Beckham's on a 1-year deal. I still love Bateman. I wouldn't be surprised if Bateman's a better player than Zay Flowers long-term, but still, he's a health question mark himself. You could tell me any of these Ravens receivers is going to lead the team in yards this year, or lead the receiver room in yards. Maybe it's Andrews that leads the team, but leads the receiver room in yards, and I wouldn't be surprised. So I like the landing spot for Flowers, and he's just such a damn good player. He's a pretty easy pick for me here at 5.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. I have the next guy. I'll just get to him now. I have Quentin Johnston one spot ahead of Zay Flowers, but in the same tier. So it's really I have no issue going Flowers there. Quentin Johnston, I think, is a much more volatile prospect than both Jordan Addison and Zay Flowers. I think that there's a lot more. There's a larger range of outcomes here. There's the scary side, which is one of his comps for me was Brashad Perriman, where that sort of physicality and that yak ability didn't really translate as well to the NFL level. But there's also that T. Higgins comp where the physicality did translate to the NFL level. And so, you look at the landing spot, hard to argue that it's a good one. You get Justin Herbert.
Right.
And obviously, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are getting up there in age. Mike Williams can't stay on the field. Keenan Allen hasn't necessarily been, the healthiest in the world. And so he could realistically, he's going to find the field right away in year one. They've needed a vertical threat. Now, I would assume they're going to try to use him in that fashion in this offense because they've needed that for years now. They just haven't had that. They've just used these random one-off, like late round free agent type guys to sort of stretch the field.
Jalen Guyton, Tyler Johnson, or it was a couple of years ago. Yeah, there's always been somebody. By the way, they drafted his teammate, Quentin Johnston teammate's Darius Davis, and he could end up being that guy because he's like a 4.3 small player.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they got like the 5'8", 4.3 speed guy, which they could have probably gotten in the 7th round. They got him in like the 5th round. But Quentin Johnston, to me, he's got the build to be a good number 1 wideout. But and I will say this too. I think a lot of people make the TCU connections with like Josh Doxson and Jalen Reagor, and seeing how they completely flopped. Quentin Johnston, at least analytically, looks better than those players. And I know that there's hindsight involved in saying that. It's really easy for me to say that. But he had more consistent production throughout his entire time at TCU compared to those guys, especially Josh Doxson. Doxson really didn't do that much until like his final season. So there is that going for him as well. But I do think, again, this kind of profile has so much volatility historically. When you're really asking someone to like continue his yak ability to the NFL level, where these defenders are going to be so much better, to translate the physicality that he brings to the table. That's why oftentimes, the measurables at the combine don't matter for me at all, despite me being like an analytical guy and how I'm approaching this stuff, because route running and Other things are far more important at the wide receiver position. And typically, I think a lot of the athleticism metrics are just sort of embedded in draft capital itself. Like Christian Watson last year would have never gone as high as he did if not for the fact that he's just a freak physically, right? And I feel that way to some degree with Quentin Johnston. But I do think, given the draft capital landing spot, the upside that's there, he belongs in this next spot.
No problem with you taking him here if you had, for whatever reason, had the fifth pick and went with him. I would feel fine with that if you went with him over Zay Flowers. Again, I think that Flowers is the better prospect of the two. I think he projects better to the league for all of the reasons that you kind of outlined there. I will say this though, JJ, like, am I an idiot for thinking that, because I've had these conversations with people and folks on my Discord and stuff like that, like, why do you have Flowers over Quentin Johnston when Quentin Johnston's landing spot is much, much better? Am I an idiot for thinking it's not that much, much better of a landing spot? Because you could kind of like, obviously, again, Justin Herbert is in theory, and I'm not saying this to be disrespectful to Herbert, who I'm a big fan of, but like in theory, he's a better passer than Lamar Jackson. I think he probably is a better passer than Lamar Jackson. He probably projects for many more pass attempts this year, even if you bake in the offensive improvement and evolution that I'm thinking. He still probably projects for more pass attempts. So there's that, but like, this is also an incredibly crowded room in Los Angeles. And I think from a long-term perspective, it's more crowded than Zay Flowers' situation in Baltimore. Like I said, Beckham probably is not on this team next year, the Baltimore Ravens, for Zay Flowers, but with Quentin Johnston, like, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, they kicked the can on their contracts down the road another year. Like, these guys could be back in 24. We have like a target getting running back in Austin Eckler, who probably is in his last year with the team, but still, I don't know. I don't think the landing spots are like I think it's maybe slightly in favor of Johnston or maybe just negligible between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I would favor Johnston, but I think those are very, very fair points because, and one of the things, I mean, we see Todd Monken coming in, taking over as offensive coordinator for Baltimore. We're not going to see, like you said earlier, this Greg Roman offense where it's just pound the rock, don't, throw the ball 25 times a game, whatever. They're going to be more pass heavy. And all their moves this offseason have said, we're going to be more pass heavy. So that's going to happen. But the Chargers also got Kellen Moore, and we know that Kellen Moore loves to throw the ball too. So that could also help Quentin Johnston in the short term. I think short-term landing spot probably favors Johnston, but I do think that you make some good points that Flowers' landing spot, especially after 2023, what could happen and how that offense could evolve, really not as bad as people probably think. And then, Jordan Addison this year, I do think Minnesota is just like so perfect. Like could have been any of these guys going there, would have been fine, but for Addison, it was just really perfect.
100%. Yeah, I'm a little nervous that if the Chargers don't win a playoff game this year, that entire coaching staff gets wiped out. So that is like one little asterisk with the Kellen Moore thing. Yeah. But I really asked you that question because I wanted more time to think about what I'm gonna do here at the 7th pick. This is talk about a teardrop. Like once the first round receivers get off the board, the first round running backs, they get off the board. I think this is where it gets a little hairy here. I like a lot of the receivers that are coming up next, but I think there's a drop to them. None of the running backs, I think, are slam dunks here. Is it early to take a tight end? I think so. So I know this isn't Superflex, but I'm still going to take Anthony Richardson here at the 7th pick. Just because, look, we know all the appeal with rushing quarterbacks. Even if he doesn't see the field in year one, which, by the way, he's totally going to see the field in year one. I maintain he's probably going to end up starting week 1, regardless of whether you think he should or not. He profiles as a great fantasy quarterback when he gets on the field. Even if he doesn't evolve as a thrower, I think he's got a lot more potential as a passer than the consensus kind of thinks. So because I'm not bullish on any of the wide receivers, I'm not bullish on any of the running backs, I'm just going to take Anthony Richardson here and kick the can down the road on some of those guys.
No, I mean, I think that's the right pick. I have Anthony Richardson there. If you look historically over the last 10 years or so at quarterbacks who ran the ball 70 plus times as rookies with top 15 draft capital. A lot of those quarterbacks, almost all of them scored, all but one of them scored 17 plus fantasy points per game. The only one who didn't was Justin Fields. And some of them, Cam Newton, Kyler Murray. I mean, some of these guys, RG3, they had very, very, very productive rookie seasons from a fantasy perspective. So I think there's this idea that Anthony Richardson's like this super risky player, which he is to some degree in terms of like sustaining a starting job, and we probably feel better about a Bryce Young sustaining his starting job versus Richardson. But Richardson's the one who has like the fantasy football breaking ceiling. The one where you can't ignore that whenever you're drafting these guys. And then he falls to a place where to Indianapolis, to a coach that just helped Jalen Hurts do what he did. And so I think there's a lot to like about Richardson. So I'm gonna take Zach Charbonnet here because I want to talk about Zach Charbonnet because I think it's a fascinating situation because of the perception of Kenneth Walker and then what Seattle loves to do and then Charbonnet as a player, right? So start with Kenneth Walker. Obviously, Kenneth Walker being there is a big cap to Charbonnet's ceiling. It's going to be really difficult for Charbonnet to be like a consistent RB1 in that offense. And I don't disagree. I mean, Kenneth Walker is not a bad player. I don't want anyone to walk away from this podcast thinking that. But Kenneth Walker was extremely and supremely overrated last season. And I don't mean that in like he sucks kind of way. Like I said, I just mean he was dead last in success rate last year, and he was dead last in at his rate of gaining positive yards last year. He was a home run, and if you watch him, you can see this. He's a home run hitting running back, right? It's like Saquon Barkley without the pass catching ability, right? And there's an issue with that because in fantasy football, well, number one, there's an issue with that in real football. Rushing is a lot more replaceable than receiving is. And so what did Seattle go out and do? They get a guy in Charbonnet who is literally the opposite of that. If you look at Charbonnet's numbers in college, he was one of the best players in success rate last year, really good in short yardage, bigger bodied guys, even bigger than Kenneth Walker, bigger bodied guy. And he had a good receiving profile as well coming out. I mean, if you look at his worst season in yards per route run was better than Kenneth Walker's best season in yards per route run in college. And so if you look at this like from the Seahawks perspective, we can sit back and be like, that was a dumb pick. They didn't need to spend a second rounder. And I agree. Like they didn't need to spend a second round pick on a running back more than likely. But if you look at the complement of what Charbonnet can do and what Kenneth Walker has done, it makes a lot of sense. I think Charbonnet is going to see more work through the air. And I think there's a chance that he sees goal line work and he sees short yardage work. Where Kenneth Walker is still going to see, I still project Kenneth Walker to be the better running back and all that. But I think people are sort of overstating this landing spot when I think Charbonnet can be a flex play and then have the upside of number one, just being better than Kenneth Walker, but also Kenneth Walker getting injured and being that flex with upside from a handcuffing perspective. And so, look, this tier, there's other guys, other directions you can go. I'm not going to fault anyone for going with some of those other players. I just wanted to talk Charbonnet a little bit because I think there's just a lot of interest with him. He's falling a lot in drafts. I've gotten him pretty late in some drafts, later than I expected, at least, given the fact that he was the consensus RB3 in this class. And he still had good draft capital. It's just that the landing spot's really pushing him down.
Yeah. No, listen, there was no chance I was taking Zach Charbonnet just because I wanted you to talk about him.
There we go.
There we go. That's how you host a podcast, people. I love everything you just said there. And look, I'd add this. Again, think what you want about whether this is a good decision or not, but the Seahawks had some of the worst depth behind Kenneth Walker, like in the entire NFL. Their drop from Kenneth Walker to RB2, RB3 was dramatic. They lost Rashad Penny, they lost Travis Homer, and there were issues with both those guys, but still huge drop there. So Charbonnet is like, even if he's just the backup, there's a lot of injury upside here with Kenneth Walker, a guy that has already been hurt in his rookie year. And nobody should be pissed at you for pointing out the success rate stuff, because anybody who watches Kenneth Walker, the first thing they say is, he's a little boom bust as a runner. And I think it makes perfect sense there. So, and Charbonnet is projects really well as I compared him to James Conner, like a steady grinder, do it all type guy.
Yeah. And there's nothing like that. Is that not a perfect pairing? I mean, like realistically,
it's a great pairing.
That's exactly what you want. It's just that it was ridiculous to most of us, where you can make the argument that they could have gone after a Roschon Johnson and maybe had the same sort of compliment to a guy like Kenneth Walker, and that would have been a lot less costly. But the compliment is at least there. I at least understand it. I just don't understand the capital used to get him.
Yeah. All right. 109 here. God, this is rough. Again, not really sure where I'm going to go here. Again, I think it's still, don't feel great about any of the receivers here necessarily. I think both the next two running backs I've got are still a little dicey this early, but screw it. I'm just gonna take Dalton Kincaid here. I'm gonna be a coward one more time. I think Kincaid projects really well as just like a pure receiving tight end. I know that some of that stuff can be super anecdotal, but I do kind of buy it with the Bills that that's their plan for Dalton Kincaid, a player they traded up for. They wanted to jump the Dallas Cowboys. I think he'll basically be their big slot receiver. And I also think from a year one perspective, like, typically tight ends don't produce in year one. They don't produce early in their career. There's so many guys that are, producing on their second teams, third teams sometimes at this position. I think that because they're basically just going to ask him to do receiving work and not much blocking, like that could help the transition here a little bit. So I think you could get anywhere between 60 to 70 targets in year one, and long term, again, I'm pretending that Dalton Kincaid is a wide receiver. Don't at me. I'm not going to chart him for reception perception, but I'm pretending he's a wide receiver here. And I'm like, yeah, big receiver on a depth chart that needs help attached to Josh Allen. I feel really good about that at 109, even if the position designation does give me a little bit of pause here.
Yeah, look, I think that's a great pick. Kincaid, I do have like a tight end model that's sort of like in beta mode right now that I haven't really published and pushed out there that heavily, but he does rate as it's tough because he didn't test, and athleticism does matter at tight end for fantasy. So you have to sort of be a little subjective. But if you are subjective and if you hit a certain speed score, he would have been the third best tight end in that model since 2015. And the guys ahead of him are Kyle Pitts and Dallas Goedert. Guys right below him are guys like Mark Andrews and George Kittle. So he's in good company, right? The other thing too, you mentioned him playing like this big slot role. I think that their actions, it's very easy to like look at the headlines and be like, oh yeah, they're talking about another tight end playing the slot a whole lot. It's sort of like a running back playing the slot a whole lot, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you look at what they did from like their actions perspective, they didn't go after a slot receiver in this class. Mm-hmm. And all they have there, who I love Khalil Shakir. I think Khalil Shakir is a very, very underrated player. But it does sort of signal that they are going to use Kincaid in that role a little bit. And then, sort of alleviate that from that stress of seeing a whole lot of work from Khalil Shakir, who was a day three guy, wasn't necessarily someone who was going to be able to be a full-time guy right away. So it makes a lot of sense that they're going to use him in that way. So I think Kincaid's a great pick there.
Yeah, I also think there's like a non-0% chance that Khalil Shakir can play flanker and like take potentially some snaps from Gabe Davis too. So like, I don't think it's totally over for Khalil Shakir, because I know that was some of the reaction to this pick too, but pretty much we're on the same page there. So, all right, 110, where are we going, JJ?
I'm going to go Devon Achane here, which I'm pretty shocked at because, again, I was this like running back weight guy during the offseason. I'm like, oh, no, Devon Achane is going to be so overrated in rookie drafts because I thought he was pre-draft. I really thought he was. And then there's one landing spot, literally one spot where he could go to where he could just dominate. And he went to that exact spot, that outside zone scheme, with Mike McDaniel. We've seen smaller, faster, shiftier running backs like Elijah Mitchell, Raheem Mostert, both in San Francisco and in Miami, thrive in that offense. I mean, Raheem Mostert came out at 195. It's not like he's this massive running back either. And Achane has a great production profile, obviously has the speed. And I this is more of a subjective take, but couldn't you see Mike McDaniel sort of being one of the head coaches that like doesn't care about running? Like he's not sitting there being like, this guy's small, he can't handle this workload, I'm just going to give him 15 plus touches a game because he's really good. Like I could see Mike McDaniel being that guy for that.
Didn't the GM say like, oh yeah, Mike McDaniel like wouldn't shut up about him, you know, basically, which is a little like reminiscent of Kyle Shanahan and Joe Williams saying like, I'm never going to sleep again if we, and it's from the same coaching show, I'm never going to sleep again if we don't take this guy. But still, I think it proves your point there that he really loves the player. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, this offense is perfect for him. This offense has so much speed, it's frightening. But he's one of those players. I don't think he's going to be an RB1 in fantasy, but I think he can be an RB2 based on how efficient the possibilities are there for him. So for me, Devon Achane is next, and he's the last guy that I have in this tier.
Yep. If I was less of a coward, that's who I would have taken at 109. I really thought about it. And I agree with everything you just said. And basically, I think the Dolphins need to evolve their run game for their offense to take the next step. Like that game against the Bills late in the season where their run game was kind of popping off. I know they didn't eventually win, but that sort of helped them break the slump a little bit that they fell in against the Chargers and 49ers. If Devon Achane ends up being a key part in that, it's big for him. 111 here. This is where I'm going to take Jonathan Mingo. I know that Jonathan Mingo is not going to look good in any sort of production-based model. Again, I read JJ's draft guide, so you should too.
He looks okay enough, I should say. Like he's
okay adjacent
enough. Yeah.
Okay. He's fine. But anyways, I've talked a lot about Jonathan Mingo on the show, so people know my stance on him. They know that I've mentioned the reception perception success rates are pretty similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think that the Panthers coaching staff can put him in the right role, but I am curious what you think about Mingo, who was even as much as I like Mingo, I was surprised that he was the 39th pick, the next receiver off the board behind these big four in the first round.
Yeah, analytically, like I said, this kind of profile is not great. He's not an early declare. We like to see early declare wide receivers. His top season in yards per team pass attempt, not great. Wasn't horrific, but wasn't fantastic. I liked what you said about him on my show, about him being potentially a big slot and him sort of like comping to like a bigger Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think that the nice part about Mingo, because I have Mingo in this tier, and I think this tier is massive for the record. Like after Devon Achane goes, you can make an argument for about 9 guys to go next. But with Mingo going to Carolina, the one piece that I really like about that is there's no one playing an obvious role at wide receiver within that offense where they can really mix and match and just see where he wins best, and they can right. Sort of just play around with it and see where Mingo looks best. Within that offense, maybe he ends up playing X. Maybe he ends up just being the slot that you saw. So that I think is actually a good thing. And then you're pairing him with Bryce Young, obviously too, which is nice for the next 4 years or so.
Yeah, I think it's a little wide open in that receiver room right now with Carolina, but I think Mingo, it wouldn't be surprising if he's the best guy this year. All right, close us out in the first round here, JJ, at the 12th pick.
I'm just gonna go with Bryce Young. I just think it's safe, easy. Obviously the size concerns are there. Think he can have a Kyler Murray type impact from a fantasy perspective. Great passer. I think the size concerns are obviously concerns for a reason, and I get it. But first overall pick, decent enough landing spot. The coaching staff in Carolina is kind of amazing that they put together. I mean, we can't overstate that either. So I'm going to go Bryce Young here, although it's not nearly as fun as going with some of the wide receivers that were drafted in the second round.
Well, you were due for a coward pick. I made 2 in the first round. So you were due for a safe pick. And by the way, JJ thinks about rookie drafts all the time. I think about players and rookie drafts all the time, stuff like that. We're not any better than you folks out there that you get on the clock of the rookie draft sometime, you're like, for God's sakes, I'm just trying to hit a double here. I'll just take Bryce Young. I love when the decision is put out of my hands and I don't have to do something like that, but sometimes that's the way we think. We're not JJ's brain is massive and expansive and good at all this stuff, but he's not a computer. He's got human emotions. So if he takes a coward pick here at 12, I take a coward pick at number 9. Everybody's the same. Here.
Exactly.
All of us freaks, we're all the same. All right, we're going to go a little more rapid fire here in round 2 to get through this thing. And speaking of wide receivers, I will go and take our guy Jayden Reed here.
Let's go.
At the first pick in the second round. Look, again, people have heard my opinion on Jayden Reed on this show. Love the player. I think that he could be easily be the Packers' best receiver long term among the guys that are on the roster right now. As impressive as Christian Watson was as a rookie, he was still an incomplete, limited application splash player. I typically think unless he takes a big step in his second and third seasons, those guys are kind of volatile when they're your number 1 receivers. Guys like Jayden Reed who have well-rounded games, I think are that projects really well as your number 1 type of receiver. So we'll see how good the number 1 receiver on the Packers is with Jordan Love as quarterback, but I'm a very big fan of Jayden Reed's game. Love that he got drafted as high as he did. I feel very confident taking him first pick in the second round here.
Yeah, look, the analytical bros out there don't like Jayden Reed as much as I do, and I'm an analytical bro too. I'm someone who crunches these numbers when I'm prospecting, but I love Jayden Reed, and the reason why is because look, you can find warts on any of these wide receivers that we're talking about right now. After those first round wide receivers are gone, I mean, even some of the first round wide receivers, but when you talk about these second round wide receivers, they all have issues in one way or another, whether it's what you're seeing or whether it's what I'm seeing in spreadsheets, right? Whenever I'm analyzing these guys. And so I think that gets overlooked a lot, but with Jayden Reed, if you look at what he did during his freshman season when he was at Western Michigan, he performed better than Sky Moore did in that same offense when Sky Moore got there the next year. He outperformed D. Eskridge in that offense. I know that D. Eskridge didn't become anything or hasn't become anything, but he's still a second round pick to Seattle. And then, he gets to Michigan State. He's an older wide receiver, which is definitely somewhat of a red flag. He didn't declare early or anything like that, but he gets to Michigan State and he does everything at Michigan State. He's playing special teams. He's lining up in the backfield sometimes. He's sort of got that like Steve Smith in him a little bit. And so I'm intrigued by the fact that those things are not easily computable from a modeling perspective with prospecting, like punt and kick returning and being used in all these different facets and such. But it usually gets signal whenever you can pinpoint these guys within a rankings list or a rookie draft, whatever. And then the other thing I just got to throw out there, one of his comps in my model pre-draft was Stephon Diggs. So
Yep. I totally get that. And, I've compared him from a player's perspective to Terry McLaurin, but those are on the same axis of wide receivers. And I think Jayden Reed is on that axis, who's allegedly up to 195 now. So good for you. You've met the Packers threshold because they do have weight. They have weight thresholds, and it's like they've never taken a receiver that's 195 or under 195 or something like that. So shout out to Jayden Reed for that. By the way, I just want to say this. I know I said rapid fire, but I want to say this too. I did go a little off my rankings here because, like, my personal rankings, dynasty-wise, I actually have Jayden Reed higher than Jonathan Mingo, but I just figure, like, he went higher in the draft. This not that JJ's necessarily going to do this, but sometimes it does make sense to read the room. And, like, I knew Jayden Reed JJ's a big fan of his game, but I still went with the guy who went higher than him just because sometimes you got to do that. You got to go off your rankings a little bit every now and again. But I did just want to say, like, from a rankings perspective, I have a huge flag plant on Jayden Reed, who I'm a big fan of. But all right, JJ, pick 2 in the second round.
Look, I don't want to go CJ Stroud. I'm gonna pass on that right now. I just went Bryce Young. I'm not gonna take another quarterback. I'm gonna go with Marvin Mims with the next pick. By the way, Jayden Reed, this is totally not about Marvin Mims, but look at the Green Bay Packers round 2 wide receiver track record too, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Very, very nice track record. But with Marvin Mims, this is Sean Payton looking at his wide receiver room that appears crowded, but it's not as crowded as people think because they're trying to get rid of guys / contracts and all that. And this is a Sean Payton pick. Maybe it's his Brandon Cooks. Maybe he sees that in him. He's a smaller wide receiver, can get down the field. He can win contested catches. I think there is some fear that, number one, his production was never like elite in college, but also, he's playing in not the SEC, not the Big Ten. And there's always question marks, guys playing, in these other conferences that aren't as, or that are a little bit more favorable for wide receiver play. But Mims, he had a great breakout, early declare. One of his comps in my model coming out was Jerry Jeudy. And so he actually might go and replace Jerry Jeudy. Another one, though, I do think that there's fear that Marvin Mims is a KJ Hamler type, though, too, who was another comp. And then obviously also a Denver Broncos. So he's sort of like a player that would be replacing what they already have if they're planning on getting rid of these guys. And then you have the Sean Payton stamp of approval, hypothetically. And really analytically, he looks pretty good. So I am in on Marvin Mims. I think that he's a decent pick in the second round.
Yeah, a lot more names than game in that receiver room for the Denver Broncos. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't think it's that big of a deal for Marvin Mims, who clearly Sean Payton likes a lot. All right, I'll take Kendre Miller here with the 3rd pick in the second round. I liked Kendre Miller a lot. I thought he was an explosive player. He definitely pops every time you're watching Quentin Johnston. He's a guy who can make big plays as a runner. The landing spot too, again, seems crowded right now. Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, they just signed. They're not quite Lions-ish, but they've certainly used a lot of resources at the running back position when how big of a need was running back. I definitely think they could use I thought the Williams signing made sense. It's you need kind of a counterpunch to Alvin Kamara. You also need insurance in case he is suspended for a long period of time, but it's been weird with Kamara for a while here, and I think the fact that they took Kendre Miller where they did in the draft, it just is a signal that Kamara is not on this team for the long term. And again, I don't want this to seem too hot takey, but could Kendre Miller just end up being the RB1 on this team by the end of the year? I think that's totally possible.
Yeah, I think it's possible too. He's in my in this tier for me, and then another guy having this tier, I'll go next. Again, I'm going to pass on CJ Stroud. I'm going to force you to say CJ Stroud's name. I'm going to go Sam LaPorta with this next pick. I'm very high on LaPorta. I think he's the number 2 tight end in this class. In my tight end model, he looks very firmly as the tight end 2 above Michael Mayer. Great athleticism, great best season yards per route run rate, good landing spot in Detroit, good draft capital also. So I'm going to go LaPorta with this next one.
Well, I appreciate you trying to box me in here on my own show, But I'm not going to say CJ Stroud's name here because there, I think, is only one more receiver that I feel is in this tier, like truly in this tier, and it's Josh Downs,
Nice.
Indianapolis Colts wide receiver. Look, I'm a huge Josh Downs fan. I'm sure we talked about him on your show. That was like 1,000 years ago to me at this point, and a lot going on in the old brain now, so I don't really remember. But I'm sure we talked about Josh Downs, who I'm a big fan of. He ended up going in the 3rd round, but the Colts were allegedly trying to like consistently trade up for him. They were very excited to get him. His draft phone call. I'm not saying this is like the stuff you need to be making decisions on, but like their draft phone call with him, I think really showed how much they value him as a player. And I love this. Like, I'm obsessed with this Colts offense. I think they're so interesting and so uniquely built. And then especially how Josh Downs compares to Pierce and Pittman. And I'm a big Michael Pittman fan. I think he could really break out as a number 1 receiver. I mean, I think he already did with Carson Wentz, but then it just like he's excelled relative to expectations with 2 different styles of quarterback. I think Anthony Richardson, it could be a fun fit as well. But I love Josh Downs as like a complementary receiver. Like these dudes like Josh Downs and Michael Pittman who can get open, and Alec Pierce who can get stuff done down the field. Anthony Richardson has never played with dudes like this at Florida, that's for sure. So I think Josh Downs, even though he went in the 3rd round, maybe a little bit later than expected, that's probably a result of him being 171 pounds at the combine. So I wouldn't be like, he's 171 pounds and he went the 3rd round. It's like, well, one of those is probably caused by the other. I think that's a little bit of double counting there. So overall, love the player here. And again, he's the last receiver that I feel comfortable with from a talent perspective taking here.
I think that there's a chance that Josh Downs ends up being a Tyler Lockett at the next level. Like
totally.
that he can end up developing that perimeter game a little bit, get down the field. We know that he can play the slot really well, and he'll do that immediately in that offense, because he only has to beat like Isaiah McKenzie right now. But, there's some fear that they're going to be more run heavy and all that. And I get that, but I love the talent of Josh Downs too. My model loves Josh Downs. So I think it's a great pick. I'll just say CJ Stroud, and then we can just move on. We kind of know what CJ Stroud's about at this point. I will say with Stroud, I think he's going to run a lot more in the NFL than he did at Ohio State.
Yep. I agree with you there. I think his like lack of playmaking was a little bit kind of overstated. I think you saw enough of it, and it's an interesting landing spot in Houston. I mean, I think he could. It's okay. I said interesting. I didn't say great. I think it's interesting. He's got to, if you buy into the idea that CJ Stroud has trouble processing and that he struggles under pressure, he has 2 tackles that are very good. Obviously, Laramie Tunsil, king of getting the bag, and then Titus Howard sort of came along at right tackle. This offense, the Shanahan offense, will cut the field in half. They'll do plenty of that stuff for him. So I think if you have those issues with CJ Stroud, I don't as much, but if you do, you can talk yourself into being this being a nice landing spot for him. Yeah, I mean, damn, bro, I don't even know what to do here. Again, I'm not that gassed on any of the receivers here. The running backs certainly have some questions here. So I'll just take Michael Mayer. I'll take Michael Mayer here. Good player, I think. I was kind of surprised. I don't know how you felt, but your tight end model that's in beta mode felt about Michael Mayer. But I thought it was a little surprising that he fell down this far. And again, it's always tough to say rookie tight ends could produce early, but he could be a guy that maybe doesn't get much done in year 1 with Austin Hooper being maybe the top tight end there. But I think long term, it's a pretty decent spot for him.
Yeah, I think this is the right time to take a guy like Mayer. I mean, people are taking him over LaPorta. I just ended up taking LaPorta over Mayer, so I think it's a good pick. I'm going to go Jalin Hyatt with the next one. And look, pre-draft, it was hard to buy into Hyatt as a late 1st, early 2nd round pick, but it's easier to buy into him as a 3rd rounder. It's easier to buy into him where we are in the draft right now. Maybe he really is potentially going to be like a Jameson Williams type, but I think there's a lot of issues with what he did. His only productive season, played 87% of his snaps from the slot, and they're going to ask him to be an outside guy. And then I hope they ask him to be an outside guy, because the Giants only have slot receivers. They have 45 slot guys on that team. And it was hilarious that they ended up getting Jalin Hyatt, though, because he did play the slot so much at Tennessee.
Right. It was like weird slot, though. It was not that I'm saying that means he definitely projects well to the outside, but because that he was like the inside receiver of a stack, like so far out in the stack, like he's technically a slot, but it's not like it's not like Josh Downs playing the slot.
Yeah, exactly. He's not. I mean, he was just getting vertical, and he had. I mean, it was so it was very manufactured there, that it's just difficult to get a good read on what kind of player he can be. But since we're where we are in this draft and he didn't get the draft capital that some were expecting, entering the draft, it's just a lot easier to buy into because you're only looking at upside at this point. It doesn't matter if he ends up busting. And landing spot wise, the Giants have an awful wide receiver room. I mean, it's not great, I should say. I mean, there's just like a lot of average to above average players. So he could realistically be a surprise even during his rookie season.
It's very similar to like if the Giants had taken Jalin Hyatt in the first round, I would have hated the pick. But them taking him in the third round, I love the pick. Yeah. If you had taken him at the 108, I would hate it. But if you took him at 208, that's perfectly fine. So I think perfectly fine here. It is kind of the slot receiver thing is so funny with the Giants because number one, you do want. If you want Jalin Hyatt, like part of what his real life NFL value will be is dictating coverages. You want him doing that outside, not in the slot. Right. And I was writing up Wan'Dale Robinson last night, and I was like, yeah, I think from like a success rate versus coverage standpoint, and like some of the routes he's good, like he's very similar to Jamison Crowder, who ironically is on the current Giants roster.
Yeah. and Paris Campbell now too.
Yep.
Like they just have like literally any slot guy that was
Sterling Shepard still there.
Yeah, and Sterling Shepard, who, I mean, as we've talked about, when Sterling Shepard's healthy, he gets 10 plus targets a game, it seems like. So it's like, I don't understand exactly what they're doing, but I would assume that Jalin Hyatt is going to play an outside role.
I can't wait to see what that receiver room looks like in September and then what it looks like in December, because I guarantee you it's going to be different.
Yes.
All right. 109 or 209 here, excuse me. This one, I think I'm just going to take Cedric Tillman here. We'll do it what the real NFL draft did, which is just take these bros back to back. I think Cedric Tillman profiles as perhaps and this is not saying much because there are like no other true X receivers in this class necessarily, but he profiles the best as like a combative old school throwback X receiver. I think he's going to be a bit developmental coming from this Looney Tunes Tennessee offense, but the Browns certainly have an opening for an X receiver. Like I think Amari Cooper's best as a off the line flanker that you can deploy in the slot sometimes. Elijah Moore is that exact type of player as well. DPJ I think is just a guy. Like he might be the X receiver this year, but long term it could be Cedric Tillman. And I do kind of buy into. We'll see if Watson's play cooperates, but I do think I buy into the idea that they want to evolve this offense to be a bit more pass heavy going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Next one, I'm going to go with, I'll go with Roschon Johnson next.
I thought about that as well.
I think the Bears don't, I mean, there's been a report even today that the Bears don't want, a single, workhorse back in that offense, which everything signals that. I mean, if you look at what they did last year and what they just generally have in that backfield with Deontay Foreman and Khalil Herbert, but we've seen time and time again them not use Khalil Herbert, who's been incredibly good and underrated on the ground, but we've seen them not use him as a receiver and in the passing game because his pass pro is not great. And he just hasn't developed that skill. Roschon Johnson is a great pass blocker, can play that can play that receiving role. Obviously analytically we don't have a lot to work off of with Roschon because he played behind Bijan Robinson. But he did still have a decent enough receiving profile despite that in college. And when you get a bigger bodied guy with that combination, it usually brings pretty good things. So I think Roschon, it's an okay enough landing spot because I think that he can easily be the number one running back on that team. It's just a matter of how that coaching staff wants to divvy things up.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I thought about taking him at 9 instead of Cedric Tillman. And yeah, that's a landing spot where it's like, oh no, they have Dr. Foreman, they have Khalil Herbert. It's like they might not have either of those dudes next year. I'm like, Roschon Johnson could just be easily as much as I appreciate what both of them have showed at the NFL level. Right. Johnson could be better than them. So I think it's a perfectly fair spot to take him. My last pick here, 2.11 here in our dynasty rookie draft. I'm gonna stay true to my rankings here. As much as I think Tank Dell might be like I thought he was better as a prospect than Rashee Rice. I have Rashee Rice at wide receiver 67 overall in my dynasty rankings, and I have Tank Dell wide receiver 68 overall in my dynasty rankings. And I'm just going to take Rashee Rice here because, like, I know you've seen out there, you've seen the reception perception chart. You've seen the looking red as a traffic light, red as a stop sign. Don't be doing this Rashee Rice thing. I have also said that he played most of that sample that I have on him. He played with like a fractured foot or whatever, or a toe injury. So that could be a piece of context. I also think his rookie season will probably look a lot like Sky Moore's, where I think they looked at both these guys coming lower level of competition. We're going to make you into an NFL player in year one. Like Sky Moore, you're going to be, it's crazy, JJ, how often like they had Sky Moore play X receiver. They had him play slot receiver. They had him play flanker. Like I think they were basically having him learn on the job, like all three receiver spots, even if I think he has a clear best long-term spot. I think Rashee Rice might do the same, or at least might mix in very, very sparingly as a rookie as the X receiver that they think long-term he's the X receiver field stretcher over MVS. So I think his rookie season might look very similar. I'll take him with my last pick here. Again, I know, like, I'm not even going to say the name of the quarterback because we all know why that would be an appealing thing to take Rashee Rice. Okay.
Right.
So I think another reason just is that they might view him as the long-term developmental X receiver, which I think does stand out among, Kadarius Toney, who we talked about, Sky Moore, who we talked about as well.
Yeah, I think this is the right spot because I feel like if other analysts were doing this draft, they would probably be drafting Rice earlier than we did. Just because of landing spot and all that. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done to that profile. It shows up analytically in the stuff that I look at, obviously shows up in reception perception. So I definitely get all that. I can understand going Tank Dell. I'm actually going to go with this last one. I'm going to go with another tank. I'm going to go with Tank Bigsby with this last pick. I like Bigsby a lot as a prospect. When you get that combination of a decent pass catching profile. And again, his PFF receiving grades aren't that strong, but he had a really high best season reception share, and he's got good size. When you combine those things, that generally gives you a higher hit rate with these guys. They need an RB2 in that offense. Doug Peterson talked about it all offseason. Travis Etienne, I don't think the way they used Etienne down the stretch is the way they ideally want to use Etienne. So I do think that you get a situation where Bigsby could maybe be a flex, not to the same degree as like a Zach Charbonnet, but could maybe be somewhat of a flex. And then obviously the upside is there if something were to happen to Travis Etienne.
It's so funny how Doug Peterson at the combine is like, yep, need to add another running back. You knew that was coming from me. Like he's even leaning into the Doug Peterson runs and nothing but a committee bit, which is good to see from an NFL coach. Yeah. All right, this is great. So to recap, we went Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, JSN, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, Anthony Richardson, Zach Charbonnet, Dalton Kincaid, Devon Achane, Jonathan Mingo, and Bryce Young. Panthers back-to-back to end the first round of our Dynasty rookie draft. Round 2, we went Jayden Reed, Marvin Mims, Kendre Miller, Sam LaPorta, Josh Downs, CJ Stroud, Michael Mayer, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, Roschon Johnson, Rashee Rice, and Tank Bigsby. Definitely feels like from 10 to like 206 in the second round. That was like a big tier all to itself there. Yes. So that kind of shows you that it gets murky there at the end of the first round and goes all the way through the middle of the second. So just last thing, JJ, any other names that were not picked that you want to highlight? I know, we talked about Tank Dell a little bit. Tajay Spears went in the third round. We didn't take him. There's some interesting tight ends, but any other guys like deeper receivers, deeper running backs do you think people should keep an eye on?
I think one of my favorite darts in these drafts has been Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati. He's an early declare guy. I can't believe his teammate Trey Tucker went ahead of him in the draft.
That was wild.
Yeah, it just doesn't make. I mean, I understand that maybe they see him playing like a special teams role and stuff, but it's a day 2 pick for Tucker when Tyler Scott is the superior prospect, and I will confidently say that. Way better production profile than Tucker. Early declare guy, and then if you look at the Bears depth chart. Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool are free agents next year. So he could easily step in, maybe get a little bit more work down the stretch this season and then step in if they see enough from him and be the number 2 guy in that offense next season. It's at least a possibility. And you're getting him in like the 4th round in Superflex draft. So I think that he's been one of my favorite targets this year.
Yeah, I'll throw out Puka Nacua from the LA Rams, who I saw getting a little hype on the Twitter sphere when I popped my head back up from this weekend. I really do like the idea of him potentially being like a Robert Woods type for the team there. Yeah, he's a day 3 draft pick. Who knows? But I'm a fan of his game. I think he shows you a good bit. Also, Michael Wilson from the Cardinals, like early in the 3rd round here is when I would have started to think about him. I know he's got a lot of holes in his profile, a lot of injury concerns, stuff like that. But definitely stands out in their like tiny wide receiver room if you remove DeAndre Hopkins from your mind. So those are 2 guys I would throw out there. But JJ, this is awesome. Appreciate you, the freak of freaks. Not really. Appreciate you doing this with me. Tell the people what you've got going on over at Late Round, the Late Round Draft Guide, the podcast, everything that's going on, man.
Yeah. So I have the Late Round Prospect Guide, which is out there, and you guys can check out and get all my insights on this class, my rankings, etc. And then I also just started the pre-orders for the Late Round Draft Guide, which won the FSWA publication of the year last year. It's
Boom.
back and better than ever. A lot of strategy. I don't, the draft guides, I'm not approaching it from like a player profiling standpoint. I mean, I do. I tell you, guys to target, guys to avoid, all that. But I really approach it from a deep strategic perspective and game theory perspective. So if you're into that stuff, definitely check it out over on lateround.com.
Lateround.com, baby. Yeah, no, definitely get that. It's a great compliment to, I'm very, very, very player focused and not that strategy focused. So I love when I can get something like that is very strategy focused, because it helps me out a lot. And that, if it helps me, it helps you people who listen to this podcast. So shout out to JJ for all of his help on this episode and everything else he does. You can follow JJ on Twitter, and you should, at Late Round QB. You can also follow me, if you dare, at Matt Harmon _BYB. And of course, it's never a bad time to follow at Yahoo Fantasy for all the work that we're doing. And for God's sakes, review the podcast on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, or even better, watch it. It's on YouTube now, the Yahoo Sports YouTube page. That's all very exciting. We're going to be back late Thursday night with more news and a look at the schedule release, baby. That's right, NFL. We are good boys. We are following the orders, obsessed over the schedule. I know it means nothing. Whatever. Who cares? We're doing schedule release content. We got to do some kind of content here in May, and our friend Dalton is going to be joining us for that. So until then, we're out.